Imagine being shackled, stripped of your identity, and brutalized for centuries for just being yourself. This was reality for African slaves. But how were punishments meted out? What were the most heart-wrenching scandals they endured? How did these cruel punishments affect their lives and generations to follow? Dive deep into history's darkest corners and uncover the truth. You will find answers to all these questions in this video. Number 1. Whipping. In the dark times of American history, the cruelty inflicted upon slaves was truly horrific. They endured unimaginable pain and suffering, even pregnant women and innocent children. One haunting image that has come to symbolize this brutality is that of Gordon, also known as Whipped Peter. This powerful photograph reveals the raised, crisscross scars on his back, remnants of countless lashings. But sadly, the cruelty didn't end with the whippings. Some slave owners went to even greater lengths to cause additional agony. When the wounds on their slaves' backs began to heal, these owners ordered the wounds to be deliberately reopened. They would apply substances like red pepper and turpentine to the gashes, intensifying the pain and preventing proper healing. Incredibly disturbing accounts even tell of an owner who ground a brick into fine particles, mixed it with lard, and had this vile concoction rubbed into the wounds of a helpless slave. Number 2. Mutilation. During the painful era of slavery in America, the physical demands placed on slaves were incredibly harsh. Whether toiling in the fields or working inside their masters' homes, their labor was grueling. Slaves who worked in the homes were expected to have a certain appearance and be well-groomed, often having lighter skin or being proficient in speaking. However, despite the logic that their bodies should be protected and cared for, this was rarely the case. Sadly, when slaves fought against each other or resisted their owner's authority, gruesome punishments were often inflicted upon them. It was not uncommon for owners to order mutilation of their bodies. This could involve cutting off an ear or slicing the flesh. Even more horrific acts included amputating limbs, gouging out eyes, cutting hamstrings, and castrating both males and females. What makes these punishments even more horrifying is that the victims rarely received any medical attention. They were left to suffer without proper treatment, resulting in many deaths due to infection, severe blood loss, and other complications. Number 3. Branding. Branding, a horrifying practice, involved searing the flesh of enslaved individuals using a heated metal instrument. It was a way to mark them as property, to show ownership. Large companies in particular would brand their slaves, making them easily identifiable and deterring theft or resale. Over time, these brands became physical evidence, refuting claims by companies that they had never engaged in such practices. In Louisiana, there was a law known as the Code Noir that allowed the branding of slaves as punishment for running away. By 1840, New Orleans had become the largest slave market in America, subjecting countless people to this cruel decree. Running away was a common reason for slaves to endure branding, especially in the southern states. Often, a letter or some other recognizable mark would be seared onto the slave's face. This cruel act ensured that the person could no longer be assigned to household or service work. Number 4. Suffocation by smoke. As we delve into the history of slavery, we come across the fact that several slave states actually enacted laws that were intended to regulate the treatment and rights of slaves. In theory, these laws should have offered some protection against cruelty and abuse. Unfortunately, the reality was quite different, as these laws were rarely enforced. Instead, we witness a disturbing pattern where different methods of punishment and mistreatment gained popularity in different states. One account shared by escaped slave William W. Brown sheds light on a distressing practice prevalent in Virginia. He tells the story of an owner who would bind the slaves and subject them to brutal whippings inside the smokehouse. But the cruelty didn't stop there. The owner would then create a fire using tobacco stems to generate suffocating smoke, further subjecting the slaves to punishment. Number 5. Hogshead. When we listen to the first-hand accounts of former slaves, we are confronted with the most haunting tales of abuse and torture. Moses Roper's story is one such example. Born to an African and Native American mother who was enslaved by his English father, Moses experienced unimaginable suffering. After escaping his bondage, he had the courage to write a book about his life, revealing the brutal realities endured by slaves in America. He recounted instances where some owners found pleasure and entertainment in inflicting physical punishments on their slaves. One particularly shocking story he shared was about a slaveholder who took a hogshead, a large barrel, and hammered nails into it, leaving the sharp points protruding on the inside. Then, the slaves were forced into these barrels, which were rolled down long, steep hills. All the while, the owner and the other slaves stood by, watching this horrifying spectacle unfold. Number 6. Suspended above stove. Harriet Jacobs, another courageous individual who escaped slavery, shared her own remarkable story. She found herself in the clutches of a slave owner who subjected her to relentless sexual harassment, despite his own wife's objections. To escape his advances, Harriet resorted to hiding in the crawlspace located in her grandmother's ceiling. For an incredible 7 years, she endured the cramped and stifling conditions before finally managing to flee to England. In yet another chilling account, Harriet recounted the presence of a nearby slaveholder who had an extensive number of enslaved individuals under his control. This man had a favorite form of punishment that was particularly cruel. He would tie up a slave, suspending them above the ground, and then proceed to light a fire directly above them. As the flames raged, a piece of fatty pork would be cooked, causing the burning fat to drip onto the exposed skin of the helpless slave. Number 7. Public burning. Punishments during slavery were often designed to be public spectacles. They wanted to send a chilling message to other enslaved individuals that they needed to behave or face similar discipline. These public displays were also disturbing forms of entertainment for some, with owners and even people from nearby towns gathering to witness the brutality. Sadly, even after slavery was officially abolished, public acts of violence like lynchings and hangings continued well into the 20th century. One particularly horrifying method of punishment was public burning. Slaves would be either tied to a stake or suspended above a fire. The sheer terror and agony of such a punishment are unimaginable. Some slaves would faint or pass out from the smoke inhalation before the flames consumed their bodies. However, many others were subjected to the excruciating torture of the burning flames until their lives were finally extinguished. Number 8. Long-term chaining. Chains played a distressing role throughout the history of slavery. From the very beginning, captured Africans were shackled together on slave ships, confined to the dark and cramped halls. Chains were also used as a means to control repeat runaway slaves, keeping them restrained for extended periods. Sometimes, slaves were even chained to their workstations or to each other. In some instances, long lines of slaves were shackled together, compelled to perform tasks in unison. It was this practice that gave rise to the infamous chain gangs in U.S. prisons. The echoes of this cruel bondage continue to resonate through history. One particularly notorious figure infamous for her brutal treatment of slaves, even by the standards of the 19th century, was Madame Delphine Lalaurie. Numerous investigations were conducted to assess the condition of her slaves until a devastating fire engulfed her home in 1834. During the tragic incident, an elderly female slave who worked as a cook supposedly set fire to the house in a desperate act of self-destruction. Shockingly, she had been shackled to the stove with the cooking fire. The aftermath of the fire revealed a horrifying discovery. Several slaves were found in the Lalaurie attic, trapped in unimaginable conditions. They were suspended by their necks, their limbs painfully stretched and torn as they stood, cruelly chained. The atrocities and punishments inflicted upon enslaved individuals during the era of slavery in America are a haunting reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the urgent need for justice and compassion. The accounts of former slaves like Moses Roper and Harriet Jacobs, as well as the public spectacles of violence and the use of chains, serve as chilling testaments to the inhumane treatment endured by millions of people.